In this video I would like to try and show you how you can turn a standard electric violin like this one with a passive pickup, a piezo pickup, no battery on the violin, no special electronics built into the violin, no tone control or volume. It just purely sends out the signal straight from the piezo. In other words, it's a really harsh sounding violin. Now I could put a direct interface like this, which I've been discussing in these videos, which I will do, but at first I'm going to play just the raw sound of the instrument, and then I'm going to record it like that, and then I'm going to use the direct input device, the DI device, to show the difference in the sound, and then I'm going to start changing the sound to make this violin sound more like an acoustic violin. In fact, the violin I choose, I've chosen this one to show you. It's an old violin. It's a bit beat up, but it's fairly reasonable. It doesn't play very well, but it has a very dark sound, and it's that sound that I want to capture and use on my electric violin. So I'm going to use a process called convolution, which sounds a bit technical, but if you look it up on Wikipedia, it basically means making one thing sound like another. That's basically it. There's a whole load of mathematics involved, but I don't really want to go down that route because it is beyond my ability. But I'm going to use something called an impulse response processor, which basically uses this idea of convolution to change the sound of things. So that's what I'm going to use. And this one I'm using is called SIR. It's written by a chap called Christian Newfink, and I will provide the links for his software. He's very kind. He allows you to download it for free, and you can use it as long as you wish. So that's very useful. And I'm going to use Reaper, which is a piece of software that I do a lot of recording with. Reaper is once again something you can download for free and try it out for 30 days and see if you like it. I'll use Reaper because it's nice and easy to demonstrate, and I'll try and put some screenshots on as well so you can see exactly what I'm doing when I'm tinkering around with the software. But basically, first of all, I'm going to record a little tune now onto Reaper, and then I'm going to use the DI box, record the same tune again, and then once I've done that, I'll start tinkering around on the software to show you how we can make the electric violin sound like an acoustic one. And I'll also show you how I have to take certain sounds from these acoustic violins. That's another part of the process. Okay, so here we go. I'll start off by recording a little tune. Here we go. Yeah, it's a bit harsh, certainly. There are no bottom end frequencies at all there because I'm not using an interface device. Okay, so the next part of this demonstration, I'll plug the interface in and record the tune again. I'll save that. plug this into the little DI box, the Fishman DI box. Oh, if you're not too familiar with these DI boxes, I've actually described all about them on my earlier videos. Right, so that's plugged in now. Maybe just take the volume down a tad. Okay, so now I'll make a second recording. Right, that's the second recording now. I'll save that. And I'll now transfer over to the computer so you can see exactly what's happening on screen and start showing you how we can use impulse responses. What I'm going to do now is show you how you can capture an impulse response from a violin. This is a nice violin, not quite an old one, this one, not very valuable, but it does have a nice deep sound, deep tone, and that's what I'm going to try and capture using this microphone. I've got my recording software ready and I'll switch that on now, and I'll flick the bridge with my fingernail. That's recorded that sound on there. Now I'll do the same thing with this, which is a small screwdriver which has got tape on the end, and this will give me a harder sound. You can perhaps see there's a larger nick on that sound file there. Now the other thing is, I had the strings open while I did that, so I'm going to put my hand across now and do the same thing with the strings closed. That's the first one, and the second one. That's a good sharp knock. It doesn't do any damage to the violin. I haven't hit it very hard, but in fact it does record the actual sound of the body of the instrument, which is what we need. Now the next thing, I'll stop that recording now, and I'll show you how you can isolate those individual impulses and use them to link into the impulse response software. Okay. So here you can see the sound file I recorded, and you can see the individual impulses on that file. The other sounds that you can see are my voice when I was talking over the top of the video, so I can exclude those quite easily. First of all, if I go into the first impulse here, in fact before I do that I'll just mark them up to make it nice and easy to find them. That's the second one. There's the third one, which was a gentle tap with my finger, and this was the fourth one, which was a tap with that screwdriver which had insulation tape wrapped around it to make it slightly softer. Okay, so going to the first impulse, you can see it quite clearly there. It's quite distinct from my vocals, so I'm going to just trim this off. And there's two ways of doing this. With this software I can split the file and just remove that fade in and fade out. I can split the file like that, and I don't really want to capture the whole of the tail of the impulse. That's about right there, so I'll split that in that position. Let's clean that up and move that away. Now we can see exactly the first impulse that I recorded, and I'm just going to bring that back a little bit there to about there, so I've got the full impulse now neatly recorded, and I'm going to put a start and a stop marker in there so that that's the length of the actual WAV file that I'm going to save to the disk, to the hard drive. So I need to, with Reaper I have to render that as a separate WAV, and the thing you need to make sure that you do is check that you actually have this option chosen here, time selection. That basically means it will only export what is in that time selection there between the start and the stop flag that I indicated, and I'm going to call this impulse response 1, and that will go into my folder. I'm saving it as a WAV file, 24-bit, so that's more than good enough for the purposes of our of this demonstration. Next thing is I'll render that. That's rendered. It looks a bit strange, but don't worry, it's all there. Now the next one. There's a slightly easier way of doing this actually, with Reaper anyway there is. I can just simply put the start and the stop flag. There we are. I can set the boundaries, and I don't need to chop it up like I did before, because as soon as I go on to render, that time selection feature there means it will only record that small portion of the WAV. It will only save that. So I'm going to just press IR, call this IR2, and save that in the same way as before. So that's now saved. I'll go to my third impulse response, which was this one. Do exactly the same thing, just zoom in a bit. Choose that amount there. There we are, and render that as IR3. Job done. And then finally the very sharp one, as you can see. I have a feeling this will be the best impulse response. Sometimes the sharper ones give a better sound of the actual tone of the actual instrument, so it will be interesting to see. There we are, that's captured that, so I shall just render that as IR4. There we are, and that's now captured 4 impulse responses from that sound file. So that's fairly straightforward, and the next thing I will do is load up my original recording of the tune that I made with the Scorpion violin, and then we'll have a listen to the difference when we add these impulse responses to it. Okay. Here are the 2 sound files that I recorded at the start of this video. You may remember this one was recorded without any kind of interface, and this one I used a Fishman interface. Let's have a quick listen to this one. Quite a tinny sort of sound. Now this one. certainly a lot more of the frequency of the electric violin in that second recording, a bit more on the bass side as well, but it still sounds like an electric violin. So I want to try and make this sound more like an acoustic violin. That's where this software comes in. It's the SIR plugin produced by Christian Newfink. If I load that up, I've already opened the file, so it's found my 4 individual impulse responses that I made earlier on. You can locate that by pressing open file and find the folder that you stored those impulses in. And once you find those, it will load every WAV file that it finds in that particular folder. Now, it's not advisable to click on these because these are these individual WAV files, so they won't really have much of an effect. It's these that we need to click on, the impulses, and you can see the shape of a knock that I recorded. That was a slightly softer knock. That was the very hard one, and you can see the shape quite clearly there in that little display. So going back to the first one, looking at this software, we've got a number of controls we can choose, but first of all I'll just play using impulse response 1. I'll just play the sound of the instrument, and I'll take off what is known as the dry signal. Now what that means is that's this sound here that we just listened to. Let's just listen to that dry signal. That basically is the sound that we've recorded. The wet sound, if I switch the dry signal off and put the wet sound on, is the sound of my other violin, my acoustic violin, being mixed in with the sound of the electric violin. Let's compare. So already it's starting to sound more like an acoustic instrument. There is a small amount of reverb in that sound. And we've got here some controls. We've got one control called length. Now I don't know if you can see these 2 envelope shapes are gradually decreasing the length of the actual impulse response that we are loading in to this piece of software, this processor. So I'm actually reducing the length. Now if you look at the complete, I'll go to IR4, to impulse response 4. If you look, there's the original knock at the beginning of the sound, and then it gradually decays off as the sound dies away. So we don't really need this back end of the impulse as such, so we can decrease that by bringing along these 2 envelopes here, and we can just listen to the sound of the start of the impulse. And I'll go back to the first one. And what that actually does, it removes, what that does is it removes some of the reverb that's coming from the body of the violin. You can also alter things by stretching the sound, What that does is it stretches that impulse response wav, makes it longer. Now these things are very useful because you can shape the actual sound. Likewise, down here there's a graphic display. If you left click on that, you can add points to actually remove some of the frequencies. So you can further shape the sound using that. If you don't want to use that, you can just right click on those points and they are then removed. I'm not going to use that for the time being. I just want to show you the different sounds and the different impulse responses that I've made. Okay, so that's the first one that I recorded. This is the second one. Some difference. So now I'll look at the sounds where I use the interface unit. So let's just compare. This is the dry sound without any convolution effect added. And this is the wet sound. I know which I'd prefer to use or listen to. Now, it's quite useful to not completely leave out the original signal, because that does give a little bit more attack to the sound. So I'll switch that on and I'll slowly bring that dry signal and mix it with the wet signal, and we can hear how the sound might change. So there's lots that can actually be done using an impulse response processor, particularly if you make your own impulses, because these four impulse responses that I made were done quite quickly, and you can spend hours making different impulse responses from different parts of the violin body. You can just tap the edge, you can tap the back, you can tap the front, as long as you're careful, of course. But you can produce maybe 30-40 different impulse responses, and you can listen to the different ways in which they affect the sound of your recording, and in that way you can produce a set of really good responses that are tailor-made to the particular violin that you're recording. So it gives you a great deal of flexibility, and it means that you can start to make an electric violin sound more acoustic. There are lots more things I want to talk about regarding recording violins, but that will have to wait for the time being. I'm going to add to this series as time progresses and start to talk more about recording the violin. But I hope that's been useful for you today, and you've managed to get a little bit more knowledge about this whole area of impulse response and convolution. Thank you for watching. Please drop by again soon. Bye bye for now.